You already know his name. You use it as an insult. Machiavellian, cold, scheming, ruthless, the man who said the ends justify the means and smiled while the knife went in. Here is that villain, in February of 1513. He is hanging by his wrists from a rope in a Florentine prison, dropped and jerked short of the floor, again and again, so the shoulders tear. 6 times by his own count. He is being tortured for a conspiracy he had nothing to do with, by the government he had served faithfully for 14 years, and he confesses to nothing, because he knows nothing. He never wrote, "The ends justify the means." He was not a prince, or an advisor to princes, or rich, or powerful. He was a middle-class civil servant who lost everything and wrote the most infamous book in the history of politics at a farmhouse table as a job application to the family that had just had him tortured, and they didn't read it. This is the man behind the adjective. Almost nothing you think you know about him is his. Start in 1498. Florence is a republic again, having just thrown off and then burned a doomsday preacher named Savonarola, the friar who ran the city on bonfires of vanities until the city lit more, with him on top of it. A 28-year-old nobody named Niccolo Machiavelli went to hear that friar preach and wrote down what he saw. What he saw was not God. He wrote that Savonarola acts in accordance with the times and colors his lies accordingly. His very first surviving piece of political writing is a young man watching a master manipulator work a crowd and calmly noting the technique. That is the whole man in one sentence, not doing the manipulating, watching it and telling you how it's done. Weeks after the friar burned, this same nobody, with no track record anyone can explain, was hired to run the second chancery of Florence. For the next 14 years, he was the Republic's workhorse, riding dozens of missions to kings and popes and warlords. He saw everything and decided nothing. He was staff, not a principal, which is exactly why he understood power better than the people who had it. The man in the room who wasn't allowed to talk. His education came on the road. His first solo mission in 1499 sent him to Caterina Sforza, a warlord countess who received the young envoy, negotiated, then outmaneuvered him and sent him home with nothing. His first lesson in statecraft, getting beaten by someone who understood leverage better than he did. But the mission that made him nearly unmade Italy. In 1502, Florence sent him to shadow Cesare Borgia, the son of a pope, carving a kingdom out of central Italy by any means available. Machiavelli spent months embedded with his court, watching. He watched Borgia's own mercenary captains turn against him, and he watched Borgia solve it. He invited the traitors to a town called Senigallia to reconcile, embraced them warmly, walked them indoors, and had them strangled. Machiavelli was in the town that night. He wrote back to Florence in real time. "In my view, they will not be alive in the morning." He was right. He should have been horrified. Instead, he was fascinated because it worked. Here was a man who used power the way it actually functions, with no comforting story on top. Borgia became the model at the center of the book he had not yet written. One more figure haunts these years. At Borgia's court that same year was another Florentine on the payroll, Leonardo da Vinci, hired as the warlord's military engineer. The two most remarkable minds in Florence working for the same predator in the same cold months. And yet, what we do not have is a single document putting the two of them alone in a room together. History put them in the same building and drew the curtain. Back home, Machiavelli got his one chance to build something instead of just watching. He was obsessed with a single idea, that a state defended by hired mercenaries is defended by nothing, because mercenaries fight for money and money runs. A republic had to be defended by its own citizens. So, he built a citizen militia from the Florentine countryside, drilled farmers into soldiers, and in 1509 marched them to the walls of Pisa. the city Florence had failed to retake for 15 years. This time, it worked. Pisa fell. It was the proudest moment of his life, the theory made real. 3 years later, the theory met a real army. In 1512, a Spanish force of veterans marched on Florence to restore the Medici. It reached the town of Prato, where his citizen militia was waiting. The militia broke almost on contact, and the Spanish sacked Prato. Thousands dead in a matter of days. The Republic collapsed, the Medici came home, and everything Machiavelli had built, the militia, the Republic, the career, was gone inside a single week. The new Medici regime fired him, fined him, and banned him from the palazzo where he had worked for 14 years. Then, in early 1513, a list was found. Names an anti-Medici conspiracy hoped might join it. Machiavelli's was on it. There is no evidence he knew anything about the plot. It didn't matter. The list was enough. They arrested him and gave him the strappado, the rope, the pulley, the wrists bound behind the back, hauled off the floor so the arms twist up behind the body, then dropped and snapped short. More than usual. They gave him 6. We know the number because he wrote it down himself, in a wry little poem to one of the Medici, complaining about the lice in his cell in the same breath. He confessed to nothing because there was nothing to confess. He got out by luck. A Medici cardinal was elected Pope Leo X that March, and in the amnesty for the celebration, Machiavelli walked free, with wrecked shoulders and no future, into the countryside. He landed at the family farm south of Florence, and for a while he was, by his own account, a wreck and a bore, spending his days at the roadside inn playing cards and backgammon with the butcher and the miller, a former statesman gone to seed among the woodcutters. And then, in a letter to a friend in December 1513, he described his evenings, and it is the most famous private letter of the Renaissance, because in it the buffoon disappears. When evening comes, he wrote, I return home and go into my study. At the door, I take off the day's clothes, covered in mud, and put on the robes of court and palace. And decently dressed, I enter the ancient courts of the ancient men, where I am received lovingly, and feed on the food that is mine alone, and that I was born for. I am not ashamed to speak with them, and ask them the reasons for their actions, and they, in their humanity, answer me. For 4 hours I feel no boredom. I forget every pain. I do not fear poverty. Death does not frighten me. I give myself over entirely to them. Then he mentions, almost in passing, that he has written a little book on principalities, on how power is won and held and lost. And he tells his friend what he wants, for the Medici, the family that fired him and racked him, to give him a job. In his own words, I wish these Medici lords would begin to make use of me, even if they began by making me roll a stone up a hill. That is the actual origin of the prince. Not the ambition of a mastermind, the desperation of an unemployed man who missed his work. So what is the prince, really? It is short, cold, and honest in a way that had never quite been done before. It does not ask what a ruler should be, it asks what actually works, and answers without flinching. Sometimes cruelty, sometimes lies, sometimes mercy, whatever the situation demands. It is better to be feared than loved, he writes, if you cannot be both. He was not recommending evil. He was describing the machine, with the covers off, the way he had watched Borgia run it. He dedicated it to the young Medici ruler of Florence, Lorenzo. And here the story turns to legend, so we flag it as legend. It is said that when Machiavelli presented the book, Lorenzo was more interested in a pair of hunting dogs someone had brought him the same day. Probably too neat to be true. But the outcome is real. There is no record that Lorenzo ever responded. The most influential book in the history of politics was, as a job application, a total failure. And here is the part the villain version leaves out entirely. In the same years, Machiavelli wrote a second, much longer book, The Discourses, a passionate argument for republics, for liberty, for government by citizens. The man we made a synonym for tyranny spent more pages defending freedom than power. As for that famous line, "The ends justify the means," he never wrote it. Not in The Prince, not anywhere. We put it in his mouth. It was printed in 1532, 5 years after he was dead, under a license granted by a pope. 27 years later, a different pope banned it. In England, they put Machiavel on the stage as a grinning murderer who counts religion but a childish toy. The adjective was born, and it buried the man. The last act is almost unbearable in its timing. In exile, he kept writing a filthy, brilliant stage comedy that became a hit and a book on the art of war. And slowly, the Medici gave him small commissions. The largest irony of his life, they hired him to write the official history of Florence, so the man they had tortured spent his last years as the Medici's paid historian, telling the truth around the edges of what his patrons wanted to hear. Then, in 1527, the wheel came around one final time. The Medici fell again. Florence became a republic again, the thing he had loved and served and been broken for. He must have thought his moment had finally come. The republic didn't want him. To the new men he was tainted, the Medici's historian, too close to the family everyone now hated. They took a vote on his old chancery post and passed him over. He died a few weeks later, in June 1527, 58 years old, watching the republic he had given his life to hand his job to someone else. 2.5 centuries later, Florence built him a magnificent tomb in Santa Croce, carved, "For so great a name, no eulogy is adequate." Enlightenment Europe had decided he was a genius. He was not around to enjoy the promotion. So who was he? Not the schemer, the witness, the man who watched power work from 6 inches away for 14 years, wrote down honestly what he saw, and got remembered forever as the thing he was describing. The way you might blame the coroner for the corpse. The famous portrait of him, the one with the thin, knowing half-smile, was painted about 50 years after he died, and it hangs today in the Palazzo Vecchio, the building they banned him from. That is Machiavelli's whole afterlife in one detail. Honoured, at last, inside the door that was shut in his face, wearing a smile a stranger painted on him. He told the truth about power in a world that preferred pretty lies, and the world has been calling him a villain for it ever since. The cynics quote him. The tyrants think he's on their side. Almost none of them have read the book, and fewer still have read the other one, the one about freedom. He would have found all of it very funny, in the driest possible way, and then he would have written it down. This channel puts you inside history's weird days with the details the textbooks skip. Last time, a dead pope dragged into court to answer for his ambition. Machiavelli only wrote about what power really costs. Next time, a man who ran the experiment for real, at national scale, in blood, 20 years before The Prince, and never read a word of it. Subscribe. Better to be subscribed and not need it than to need it and not be subscribed. We hope that you have found this educational, enlightening, and above all, entertaining. Please like and subscribe. It really does help us to bring you more and better content.